Hey, how's it going, guys? Everyone's making this video, but it's time for me to make my UFC 281 predictions. All right, moving forward. Now we have Dan Hooker versus a up-and-comer at lightweight. This guy's name escapes me, but this is more one of those things where I am counting Dan Hooker out because he's fighting a very fresh fighter. Now, I would like to see, with Dan Hooker, I'd like to see maybe a good retirement fight for both him and Tony Ferguson. But the more that they delay that, the more broken down those two are going to be. And not to just drag Tony into this out of nowhere, but those two are the two big names at 155 who are definitely on their way out. They've really been trying their best to get it done again, but I think Father Time is actually just catching up with them, and that's all right. You know, it happens. You get older. Their careers have been astounding compared to 99.9% of UFC fighters. But I think it's time to see if he has anything left at 155. I think he could possibly pull out a win, but after that Poirier fight years ago, he just hasn't had the same thing since. 2020 was a bad year for both Dan Hooker and Tony Ferguson, and we've seen these two fighters go on skids. Hooker at least got a win against a lower tier guy, but these up-and-comers against Dan Hooker, I think Dan Hooker is going to struggle in there, and it's going to be the newcomer. And then next, it's going to be the same thing for Frankie Edgar. And this is the thing with this card is it's 2 send-off fights and then 3 head scratchers. Well, actually, I'll get to that later. But Frankie Edgar is probably going to lose this fight and then retire too. I think these next 2 fights are going to be over very fast because these guys are older and they're on their way out. Frankie's been here a lot longer than Dan Hooker has, and he's paid his dues, and he has been a lifelong fighter, a lifelong talent in the UFC. In fact, I don't know how he's been keeping it up this well. And in fact, I think Frankie Edgar is possibly the GOAT just because he has been keeping up with this stuff for so long. And he's been going, and he stayed at top tier. Even with that Marlon Vera fight, until he got front kicked, he was winning that fight against Marlon, who's way younger, way hungrier, still has more to prove. And props goes out to Frankie Edgar and Dan Hooker for staying in there. Any fighter that stays in there past their prime and takes beatings, it takes more to go in there with a fight where the odds are against you than one where you could completely dominate. Those guys have cojones of steel. Frankie Edgar, though, I gotta say, man, his age is catching up with him, and he's going to be taken out of there. I just want him to get home safe to his family and be that trainer, train the next up-and-coming generation of fighters that's coming up, and have a good send-off for him. Now, next is Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler. If you had to ask me right now, I would say Poirier, because Poirier is 33. Michael Chandler is about 36. And Poirier just has a more impressive resume and is definitely a more measured fighter. Now, Chandler does have a way to victory on this one. And if Poirier loses his temper and goes rushing in, which is usually where he gets caught, that's where Michael Chandler can definitely win this fight. I'm not saying Michael Chandler will definitely lose. He's got a shot, but he's a serious underdog in this fight. And Dustin Poirier is much more measured. He is a striker. He's going to piece him up, and he's going to be looking to defend those takedowns. And even then, when you look at those takedowns, seeing how Khabib took Dustin Poirier down like that, and he almost got that guillotine that almost finished Khabib. I think anyone else would have crumbled underneath that guillotine. But Poirier, right, he probably has some submissions from the background because he's also a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he could get shit done. Excuse my language. But I have Poirier winning, possibly by second round TKO, or it goes the distance because I cannot count out the heart that is Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler has put on wars, and he has always gone out swinging. I just think that his 2 wins are against Ferguson and Hooker, and even then Ferguson almost finished him in the first round in that fight, despite him getting a knockout in the second. So I just don't think that his resume is very impressive when all that he's done is basically finish 2 fighters that were obviously over the hill. His Hooker win was way more impressive because he really made Hooker look powerless in there. And then out of the blue, he's talking down on Islam like he's going to defeat Islam. I think that's the thing is Chandler is hyping himself up a little too much in my opinion, and I think I want to see some wins come from him before he starts to act like that cocky fighter, because sometimes he can get that way. He doesn't really, I don't know if he means to come off in that way, but that's just from what I'm seeing. And sometimes that makes him a little iffy. Like the whole celebration of the Ferguson knockout, though, there's a lot of MMA channels I've been watching that said that really wasn't a good look for him. And although I don't want to take away from knocking out El Kukui, I do agree. When you knock out someone who's past their prime and act like you're ready for a title fight, it just is a little shaky. Where Poirier has fought the best of the best that the division has to offer, and he really fought for that second title shot, and coming back in that McGregor trilogy, he's learned so much in that time. And he hasn't taken nearly as much chin damage as Chandler. Chandler's took so much damage in that Gaethje fight, and Poirier took a lot of damage in some fights, like Michael Johnson and Conor McGregor one where he got knocked out. But a lot of his losses have been via submission, where he really wasn't outstruck all that much. He was kind of just submitted, and that doesn't really have a lot of chin effects on him. Where Chandler's chin is basically glass at this point. He's very chinny, and Poirier is a precision striker who's going to be very patient with him, and if he's patient, he's definitely going to be able to knock him out in basically 1 or 2 rounds. He just needs to take his time, let Chandler be readable for a little bit, understand his fight patterns, and then go in there for the finish. Now, for this first title shot, we have Carla Esparza, who is one of the longest reigning strawweights ever to be around, and she has been a veteran for a long time. Former champion, was the one that defeated Rose Namajunas the first time, and then the second time. I was there for that 274 card, so that was a very... The reason I see Weili taking this by either a first or second round finish is because Rose is such a great fighter that she got in her own way against Carla Esparza. She stuffed all the takedowns. I don't think she was afraid of any. She should have been afraid of any of that wrestling. But Rose's big thing is that she gets in her own head and she stalls herself. So I don't know what the future of her fighting career is going to look like, because she kind of just dropped the ball mentally in there. She had all the tools, but she just didn't use them. And it was still a win for Carla Esparza, even though I could kind of see a argument for Rose winning that fight for sure. But Weili doesn't have those same mental problems. In fact, she's very tough. She has had an interesting life documentary. And let me tell you, I think Weili is going to get it done. She is a fierce striker. She's a warrior, and she is going to retain that belt. I would be surprised if Carla Esparza is even able to go the distance in this fight. And now up to the main event, we have Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. And Alex Pereira, I am impressed by the work this guy has done. He was able to knock out Sean Strickland like he was nothing, and Sean Strickland is a stand-up fighter who doesn't like to wrestle a whole lot. And even then, Alex Pereira has some really good takedown defense and some really good wrestling. I've seen reels of him wrestling out there, and I don't know if I could call which way this fight is going to go. Now, it's MMA. It's different. I know that Adesanya has jiu-jitsu game that he really doesn't use, but we did see a little bit of it in the Calvin Gastelum fight when he went to the ground with him and got him in, like, what was a triangle in the 5th round, and that was the most heart that we've ever seen Israel Adesanya put on. And then what we see from Pereira is a really good wrestling reel where he does have grappling. So a lot of people are saying, well, if Adesanya uses the clinch or uses grappling or uses leg kicks to slow his opponent down, the thing is I see Alex Pereira using all those things too. I think in the way Alex Pereira is going around this fight, saying this is a different sport, and he understands that, and he's humbling himself, and he's not getting too cocky. This makes Alex Pereira a very dangerous challenge for Adesanya, because he understands that this is a different game. He's not a dumb person. He understands what he needs to do. And Adesanya seems to be talking a little bit of trash and feeling like, when you say that, like, sometimes I see it because he's surprised that he's the betting favorite, but at the same time, there's times at the press conference where I felt like he understood what those knockouts were, and this is the time that's a do or die moment for Adesanya. It's a corner that he's really painted himself into, especially knowing the UFC fan base. They like to see finishes, and we haven't seen a whole lot of finishes from Adesanya, where Pereira has been finishing guys left and right. Not just in kickboxing, but 2 out of his 3, I believe, have been by really vicious knockout. That flying knee was scary. And then what he did to Sean Strickland by just knocking him across the octagon, basically. I think Pereira is going to be able to have more power in his hands, and he's just more measured. And I think a lot of people are going to be in Pereira's corner because they want to see more finishes in their middleweight title fight, so I wouldn't be surprised if Pereira takes this one. I think the least likely scenario, which can still happen, is if Adesanya somehow finishes Pereira. That would be a really good redemption thing, kind of like the Paulo Costa win, where everyone was giving Adesanya garbage for his Romero performance. But if he can somehow finish Pereira, I think he could get the fans on his side. But if I have to make a prediction right now, I would have to say Alex Pereira is going to win this just based on how he's handled his UFC press conferences and how he's going about this. I want to make a video specifically for this and put this on more social medias because this is actually a very drawn-out topic, but I will have to say Alex Pereira. But there's so much more to this. I want to make another video, a separate video from this before this card pops off. But those are my UFC 281 predictions. I see the 2 older fighters in the 2 first fights getting taken out of there. And then what we're going to see is we are going to see Poirier take it. We're going to see Weili take the belt. And then I definitely believe that we are going to see Alex Pereira, but I see that fight going either way. Thank you guys very much for watching my 10-minute long rant, and I will see you next time.